America's greatest athletes put all their passion into a single goal, earning medals in Olympic competition. But sustained success in the Games rests on a strong business foundation.
We'd much rather, do it the right way than do it the fast way.
Coming up on Beyond the Medals, a candid conversation with USOC Chief Executive Scott Blackman. He's setting Team USA's course for Rio and beyond.
We definitely want to host the Olympic Games in the United States.
And we examine another building block of winning, facilities and training. These investments pay off in gold? We ask legendary Olympian Shannon Miller.
This is where athletes can go and completely be in a bubble and immerse themselves in their sport.
Plus, the man who sets the plan to get athletes to the podium explains the process that paves the way for high performance.
When the games close out, you don't want to be sitting there going coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Join us now as we take you beyond the medals.
Hello, I'm Rick Horrow, and welcome to Beyond the Medals. Every month on this show, we'll bring you insight into the business of sport, with a focus on Olympic sport as we head toward the 2016 Summer Games in Rio. We'll show you what it takes to build and operate the Olympic program, the strategy and extra effort behind the scenes that creates the framework for athletic success. And on this first episode, we'll get the word straight from the top. Scott Blackman has headed the U.S. Olympic Committee for 5 years, but his association with the Olympic movement goes back more than 2 decades, starting when he was a partner at a Colorado law firm with the USOC as a marquee client.
We worked for the marketing division as they were trying to put together their joint venture with Atlanta, and that was a client that became probably half of my time over the next 7 or 8 years until I joined the USOC as inside counsel in 1999. I took a 40% pay cut at the time, and I had never been happier than I was on my first day at the USOC. I was a candidate for the USOC CEO job in 2001. I didn't get the job. In retrospect, I think it was the very best thing that could have happened to me.
Blackman's Plan B led him to sports and entertainment colossus AEG, where he gained invaluable experience as COO.
I learned more in the 5 years that I worked at AEG than I probably had in my entire life.
Biggest things you learned working at AEG that help you in your role today?
If you're not passionate about it, don't do it. You really have to love what you do.
Blackman brought his passion and expertise back to the USOC when he was named CEO in 2010. His task? To stabilize and energize an organization struggling to find consistent leadership and direction.
I was lucky. I came in at a really good time. The bar, candidly, was pretty low. We said as our 2 objectives coming in, one, we wanted to substantially increase our philanthropic revenue because we're the only National Olympic Committee in the world that doesn't get government support, at least in a developed country. And we really wanted to rebuild our relationships internationally. We wanted to do that kind of step by step, 1 step at a time. And I think it's worked well.
The heads of the Olympic committees at X number of countries who have fundraising problems will go to their governments and ask for the supplemental check to close the gap. You wake up in the morning and you realize you're not calling the government for that, or they're not going to answer your call. Is it challenging or is it liberating?
It's liberating, and we've considered from time to time whether we want to go in and seek government support. And the truth is that if you look at our success on the field of play, we've won the medal count at the Summer Games every game since Atlanta. So it's hard for us to go in there and say it's not working. It's really working well. We wish we had more money to support our athletes. Only about half of the athletes on our national teams get support from us. On the other hand, one of the things that makes us, I think, effective is that we can be pretty nimble. We can make mid-course corrections, and it's tougher to do that if you've got to be accountable up on the hill.
You're one of only 4 programs, countries that supports the Paralympic program as part of the overall structure as well. What kind of excitement does that create, and what kind of challenges does that create?
You know who it's great for? It's great for the Olympic athletes. When we have events where they're together, it tends to inspire the Olympic athletes. That's not really a disability movement anymore. It's a high-performance sports movement. From a fundraising perspective, it's great for us because, there are people out there who really want to support Paralympic sport but not Olympic sport, and vice versa. So it allows us to kind of broaden our offering of philanthropy to people who want to make a difference in sports, but maybe not just in the Olympic context.
Diversity may be a fundraising asset, but it's a management challenge, especially now that Team USA includes both amateur and professional athletes with a wide spectrum of needs and expectations.
Yeah, I mean, we have 48 different sports that we manage, and one of the mantras for us is that we have to be willing to customize what we do, and we can't make rules for one sport that will necessarily apply to another.
Do you think your job is more similar or different than Roger Goodell, Adam Silver, Gary Bettman, the commissioners of the major sports?
I think it's probably more similar. At the end of the day, we each have a set of constituents. They have athletes, we have athletes. They have teams, we have sports, each of whom is its own team. So I think it is pretty similar. They have a little bit different salary cap to work with than we have here. Our athletes who are lucky enough to get support get an average of $20,000 a year. And as I said, a lot of our athletes aren't getting any support at all. So it's very, very different. And they have to deal with some issues that we don't really see here, and vice versa. We've got a lot of sports who are just trying to hang on and continue their existence, sports with budgets of less than $500,000 for the whole sport.
Your role on a day-to-day basis, management, fundraising, motivation, long-term planning, fill in the blank.
You know, I probably spend more time on the fundraising side now than I will over the long term. We launched a new foundation last year. In 2009, we were raising less than $1 million a year in major gifts. We're raising a little bit more than $15 million a year now. We want to be substantially more than that in 3 years.
What is the most important philosophical component of your management style?
To me, I think shooting straight is incredibly important. I think integrity, obviously, is the base of everything we do, particularly when you work for an organization like the USOC and a movement like the Olympic movement that's values-based. So we'd much rather, you know, do it the right way than do it the fast way. But we also need to be accountable. I mean, our athletes are held accountable every time that they compete. So we have to be willing to hold ourselves accountable as well.
Blackman's style has produced substantive results. Philanthropic support for the USOC nearly doubled in his first quad at the helm. Revenue from licensing and retail sales has also increased following a strong U.S. showing on the podium at the London Games. Blackman was honored as 2012 Sports Executive of the Year by Sports Business Journal.
But Olympians don't rest on their laurels, and Scott Blackman knows that his organization faces constant challenges. We'll have more from the CEO a little later on when he walks me through the process of choosing the U.S. city that'll bid to host the 2024 Olympic Games. Also ahead, we discuss the impact of new international Olympic policies that could open the door for more sports to join the Games. And up next, we'll take you inside a building that gives U.S. Olympians the winning edge. The USOC's flagship facility in Colorado Springs isn't just a training center, it's a revenue center.
How can we leverage these facilities now to raise additional funds that go back into the coffers in order to support our athletes even more?
Plus, Olympic gymnastics great Shannon Miller joins us when we return. You're watching Beyond the Medals, the business of sport. Welcome back to Beyond the Medals. I'm Rick Horrow. The USOC operates 3 training centers and 17 official training sites across the United States. They serve the high-performance training needs of elite athletes, and they're also open to the public for tours and events. Millions of dollars have been invested in improving these facilities over the last decade, and the return is expected to yield more than just medals. Case in point, the flagship Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. The Ted Stevens Sports Services Center, opened in 2014, is the new crown jewel of the complex. It houses the only one-stop comprehensive sports medicine assessment facility in the United States, as well as a 37,000 square foot state-of-the-art strength and conditioning area. Over $7 million in individual, corporate, and foundation gifts helped make its construction possible. But in addition to amenities for athletes, the Colorado Springs Center features attractions for visitors. Its Hall of Fame Rotunda celebrates Olympic history, and a Team USA store offers a wide range of merchandise. More than 130,000 guests annually tour its 37 acres. Benita Fitzgerald-Mosley, herself a U.S. gold medalist in track and field, oversees the Olympic Training Centers as the USOC's Chief of Organizational Excellence. She points out the public-facing aspect of these centers supports their core business function.
Well, inspiring Americans, you know, through the Olympic movement is something that's part of our mission. We get to feel and do that right here at the Colorado Springs Olympic Training Center and all three of our centers as well. And it's important to be able to bring visitors here so they can see, touch, smell, feel our Olympic activity. And so when they watch us and our athletes on television, they are really inspired and even more excited to support our movement and support our athletes.
You've come up the Olympic ranks, you trained, you understand what it was like and what it is like. Do you look at a facility like that and you said, boy, what could I have done with something like this? You realize that everybody's come a long way. Can you actually feel it?
I can actually feel it. I mean, when I used to come here, when this facility first opened, there were Quonset huts, old military bases, all, you know, buildings all around the campus. And it's really now an iconic place where our athletes can come and train. They can learn how to cook for themselves. They can get sports medicine attention. They can work with our sports scientists and psychologists, and et cetera. It's a one-stop shopping for all the things they're trying to be in pursuing excellence for themselves on the playing field.
The strength and conditioning area of the Ted Stevens Center is a microcosm of the one-stop shopping principle.
We have a little bit of everything here. When we were designing the facility, we looked at what do strength and conditioning coaches need to implement their programs, what are athletes looking for, what are other countries doing in their facilities. Compared to our old facility, we had limited space. You could only fit maybe 10, 15 athletes in at a time. We're here, we have different training sessions happening all at one time.
Strength and conditioning coordinator Amanda Wittenmeyer gave me a tour of her domain. There's a lot to see, and also plenty of technology you can't see.
So over here we have 60-meter straightaway, and what we can do is embed force plates into the track, where we can get ground reaction force measurements, and so we can quantify athletes while they're running, jumping, or performing an exercise.
Explain what that means to a guy that doesn't understand it.
Yeah, so underneath, on this lane right here, under the track, think of like a scale. A scale is underneath, and it's measuring, as we're just walking right now, it's measuring our ground reaction force. So as we're taking a step, we're generating force down into the track. And so we're able to get measurements. And those measurements help us quantify athletic movements.
So speed, stride, weight distribution, everything.
It just depends on what we're looking for in that athlete.
And the Olympic Training Center is also a revenue center for the USOC.
You know, we have a mandate. Part of what we do among the training centers is a kind of a business development mandate to really try and see how can we leverage these facilities now and the access that we're giving the public to raise additional funds that go back into the coffers in order to support our athletes even more. So from having tours come in, we're now charging a nominal fee, $5 per person to come through. So it's $10,000 a month, growing obviously to the summer months where we'll have a lot more tours coming through. We're doing more catering events, more business events. We'll turn our gym into a lunch venue or a dinner venue when our athletes don't need it. Paramount, though, is to make sure that the facilities are accessed by our athletes. But after that, when we've got an empty facility, why not use it?
So the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs is a very versatile asset for the USOC. It's a resource for athletes, and it also generates revenue and raises public awareness of the Olympic brand. But the bottom line, how does investment in facilities and training further the mission of athletic excellence? Well, for perspective on this, we welcome the most decorated gymnast in American history. Shannon Miller won 7 Olympic medals in '92 and '96, including 2 gold medals at the Atlanta Games. She joins us from Jacksonville, Florida. Shannon, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
First of all, let's look at the USOC's commitment to facilities. There's been a lot of money spent on training centers in the last 10 years. And if the goal is getting to the podium, in your estimation, is that the right priority?
Absolutely. It's absolutely critical. You know, our facilities are not funded by the government like many other countries. We rely on sponsor dollars. We rely on donations from hardworking Americans that want to see these athletes' dreams come true and have a part in bringing those medals home. So I think it's really important to remember that these improvements further the mission of the USOC. And they do that not only for the athletes that are resident athletes at these training centers, but also those that attend training camps there, those that go there for nutrition support, for psychological training, sports psychology, sports medicine, high altitude training, things that you can't just get anywhere.
Looking at your sport, women's gymnastics, traditionally Olympians do the bulk of their training at their own gyms with their own coaches, living at home, going to school. But the USOC resources, are they playing more of a role today? And how much more centralized is that training process in your estimation?
Well, in the last 15 years, the women's gymnastics, women's artistic gymnastics, has become a lot more centralized. Now, that's not to say there weren't some growing pains along the way. When we were, first starting to kind of figure out what this centralized training meant for our sport and what that structure was. And I think there probably are some cons to it. For example, the coaches who run their gyms, they're basically away from their businesses a good portion of the time, having to travel back and forth between facilities. Same with the athletes. They're having to spend that time that could be spent resting, recuperating, time on their homework, because we're talking about teenagers, time with their families in their traveling instead. But I think the pros so far outweigh the cons. You have the group of the best athletes, you have the best coaches, and they're all together sharing the techniques, the tips. They're really coming together as a team. They're bonding. And again, we're talking about teenagers for the most part, so that's really important when they're traveling all over the world. They need to feel like they're with friends, they're with, kind of family. So I think that's a really good thing, and I think really if you look at the last 10 years, you can see that it's paid off. I mean, the women's team has just been absolutely incredible.
You certainly understand the critical importance of public support and sponsorship support. Obviously, Team USA could never succeed without it. But is there a downside to using training centers as revenue generators and opening them up for public access? Is it a distraction for elite athletes, or is it really a necessary trade-off?
Well, I tell you what, I remember taking our family vacation was to the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs before I was a competitive athlete or anything like that, and it was inspiring. So I think it's a great thing to be able to open that up to the public. At the end of the day, what we're talking about is a training center where the #1 priority is sport. This is where athletes can go and completely be in a bubble and immerse themselves in their sport. And they have the full support of the USOC staff, the full support of all of the facilities that are there, top-notch, best-in-the-world facilities. And then you have kind of that extra stuff. And if we're talking about, some appearances and whatnot, that's really done on a case-by-case basis. So if an athlete has a big competition coming up, they might say, hey, don't call me for the next 6 months, and then maybe you can give me a call and I'll do something. And that's okay. That's completely respected because it goes back to sport as being the #1 priority. However, I think what you'll find is that the vast majority of athletes really want to do these things. They want to share their story. They want to inspire others. They want to shake the hand of that sponsor that made their dream a possibility. I think the broader question is kind of how do athletes handle all those obligations along with their training, and I think that's what each individual athlete has to ask themselves, how much can I handle and still keep training the #1 priority?
Shannon Miller will be back with us in just a few minutes to discuss some very significant policy changes approved by the IOC at its recent meetings. Changes that could have a major effect on where future games are held and what sports are included. But up next, we'll have more with Scott Blackman. The CEO of the USOC gives us insight into the upcoming bid to host the 2024 games after sitting out the competition for 2020.
We have a lot of Americans who haven't been able to see the games on American soil. We need to get the games back here.
And here's a question to test your knowledge beyond the medals. Only 3 U.S. cities have hosted the Summer Olympic Games, but 1 U.S. city has bid to host the Games 7 times without ever being selected. Do you know which city it is? We'll give you the answer later in the program. The USOC has selected Boston as its candidate city to host the 2024 Summer Olympic Games. Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C. also made presentations to the committee. Official 2024 host city applications to the IOC are due in January 2016.
Welcome back to Beyond the Medals. I'm Rick Horrow. After sitting out the bidding for the 2020 Tokyo Games, the United States will once again make a pitch to bring the Summer Olympics to American soil. Should the bid succeed, it'll be the 5th time the Summer Games have been held in the U.S. Are the Games good business for the cities that host them? It's a matter of much debate, but let's look at the history.
Chicago was originally chosen as the site for the 1904 Summer Games, but St. Louis was hosting a World's Fair that year, and organizers successfully pressured the IOC to shift the event to their city. Only 12 countries trekked to the Midwest to participate in the Games, which were played over a period of nearly 5 months. The main track and field venue in 1904, Washington University's Francis Field, is still in use today. The Summer Games came to Los Angeles in 1932 with the 10-year-old LA Coliseum as the primary venue. A $1.7 million expansion of the stadium paid off as a record crowd of over 100,000 spectators attended the opening ceremonies. Due to the Great Depression, international participation was again low, but one contemporary report claimed that organizers cleared $1 million in profit from the 16-day event. It would be over 50 years before the Summer Games returned to the U.S. New York and Los Angeles were the only 2 cities in the world to make bids for the 1984 Games, and L.A. got the nod to host. With new construction held to a frugal minimum and aggressive sale of sponsorship and broadcast rights, the 1984 Games were a tremendous financial success, returning over $750 million in revenue and more than $200 million in profit. Some of these funds were used to establish the LA 84 Foundation, which has supported youth sports and community programs in the Southern California region for the last 3 decades. The most recent U.S. Summer Games were held in Atlanta in 1996. Those games cost approximately $2 billion, with about a third coming from public investments in transportation and other infrastructure. The main venue, the 85,000-seat Centennial Olympic Park, was primarily built with private monies, and following the Games was leased to the Atlanta Braves and converted to a 50,000-seat baseball stadium. 8.3 million tickets were sold for the 96 Games, helping organizers turn a modest $10 million profit, while leaving the 21-acre Centennial Olympic Park as a permanent legacy to the city.
But since 1996, American bids to host the Summer Games have met with a cool reception from the IOC. That's the situation Scott Blackman inherited when he took the USOC reins in 2010, and the one reason that he immediately made rebuilding international relationships a priority. Blackman led negotiations on a new revenue-sharing agreement that restructured global distribution of sponsorship and broadcast revenues. And with the deal done and the road paved for a 2024 bid, I asked Blackman to explain why the U.S. declined to present a candidate city to host the 2020 Games.
We had lost bids for New York in 2012 and Chicago for 2016. I wasn't here at the time that decision was made, but I think there were a lot of things going on at the USOC that had people's attention other than the bid, and I think we probably wanted to just kind of gather and decide when the best time would be.
And the heralded negotiations with the IOC over, you gave up some revenue. What did you get back?
You know, I'm not sure I'd characterize it that way. We restructured our financial relationship in a way that I think made the IOC feel better and that was fair for them, and that gave them greater shares of revenue growth. But at the end of the day, given what's happening in the global markets, which is, I mean, today we represent about 50% of the total television revenue globally. You know, that number's probably going to go down as other markets enter the fray, and China starts paying, you know, fair market value for its television rights. I think that's going to change, and so I think it was totally appropriate. What we got was a restructuring that had, you know, benefits for both parties, really.
Obviously, no guarantees, but 2024 and beyond, you would say the IOC is in a more comfortable, more reasonable, better position to react to the U.S. bid than it was before?
You know, I wouldn't limit it to a bid. I mean, at the end of the day, we want to be a more engaged, you know, participant in the global Olympic movement, and certainly part of that has to do with bidding. We definitely want to host the Olympic Games in the United States. We have a whole generation of Americans who haven't seen the Games in the United States.
Right?
The Olympic Games and the Paralympic Games, absolutely. And the Summer Games and the Winter Games, we want them all. But we have a lot of Americans who haven't been able to see the games on American soil. We need to get the games back here so that Americans stay engaged, and it's a very important market to the IOC, so I think there's kind of a mutually beneficial relationship to be had there if we can convince them that this is the place to go at some point.
Having reached a new accord with the IOC, Blackman put his own stamp on the bid process, sending a letter to 35 U.S. cities inviting them to submit a proposal to host the games.
We wanted to change the way that we approach the process. You know, always before we had kind of said, we sat back and said anybody who wants to bid can bid. We wanted to have a little bit quieter process, a little bit more thoughtful process, a little bit more informal process, because we wanted the cities to be able to spend less dollars. Yeah. We wanted to be able to have open and real conversations. So we wanted to make sure that anybody who wanted to have that conversation with us had the opportunity.
I assume one of the side benefits of having a list of 35 cities that are interested is that it causes cities to start dialogues about their respective public-private infrastructure commitments and partnerships of hosting mega events, even if it's not an Olympics.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, we would very much like to get our cities more engaged in sport. I think most of those cities are very, very interested in hosting international events, and even cities that are so small they could never host the Olympic Games, why couldn't they host, you know, the World Table Tennis Championships or the World Taekwondo Championships? So, you know, there are a number of instances where the cities that we talk to as a part of that process are now hosting events that are very important to us in establishing that we care about global sport.
You challenge these communities to come up with broad, diverse, infrastructure, satisfactory plans with, in some cases, new facilities and renovated old facilities, but yet you want to hold spending down. How do you do both?
It's not easy. Each city has a slightly different story to tell. I think the important thing is not wasting money. So the mantra that we really have been engaged with is don't build infrastructure unless it's a part of your long-term city plan. The last thing we want is somebody to build a stadium that's going to sit empty, or to build a train station or an airport that's going to sit empty. Certainly budget and sustainability are really, really important. You know, our ability to connect youth to the Olympic Games is really important. Leadership's important. One of the challenges that we had with some of our prior bids is that, you know, the United States Olympic Committee did not do a good job of building a solid relationship with the bid committee, and that was evident to the people who voted. So we really need to forge meaningful partnerships with these cities where we're giving them as much as they're giving us.
We'll dig deeper into the 2024 bid process on the next episode of Beyond the Medals. And straight ahead on this program, Olympian Shannon Miller and journalist Vicki McKellis join me to discuss some brand new IOC reforms. The way is clear for multiple cities and even countries to partner in hosting the games. How much of a game changer could this be? Stick around for our roundtable coming up on Beyond the Medals. Welcome back to Beyond the Medals. I'm Rick Horrow. Taking a deep dive into the business of Olympic sport. In December 2014, the IOC voted to approve a new strategic roadmap for the future of the Olympic movement. Agenda 2020 consists of 40 recommendations to adjust current IOC rules and policies. Among the highlights, changes to the bid process, elimination of a cap on the number of sports, and the launch of a worldwide digital Olympic channel. Joining us now to discuss the impact and implications of Agenda 2020 are two experienced Olympic observers. Shannon Miller, 1996 Olympic gold medalist in gymnastics, who remains actively involved with a sports broadcasting career and is an advocate for women's health and fitness. And former USA Today lead Olympics reporter Vicki McKellis, now distinguished professor and head of sports journalism program at the University of Georgia. Vicki, let's start by looking at the IOC's recommendations to reform the bid process. What specifically jumps out at you?
Well, you know, the reform that got all the headlines was this decision to allow bids from more than one country, more than one city within a country. I honestly think that is not going to have that much effect. I don't think we'll see a lot of those bids, and if we do, I don't think they'll be successful. The one that jumped out at me was this emphasis on using existing facilities, temporary venues, to lessen the cost of hosting the games. They're doing this, of course, in the wake of Sochi spending a reported $50 billion, Beijing spending a reported $40 billion, and having cities basically scared out of the bidding race because they just don't want to spend that kind of money. Now, you know, this is only going to work if the IOC is committed to this. They passed similar reforms to this in 2003, talking about not wanting to leave white elephants. And of course, within, you know, a decade, we saw Sochi. So it's a matter of whether they actually see it through, and it's not just a lot of talk again.
But Shannon, the IOC clearly trying to enlarge the pool of potential Olympic host cities by allowing these multi-city bids, but wouldn't this profoundly change the Olympic experience for the athletes and the spectators?
I think it would change it. I don't know that it would profoundly change it. We've already seen a broadening of the venues. You know, when you take venues like equestrian or canoe kayak, you have to find appropriate facilities for that. Whether it's 3 hours away or 4 hours away, you're going to have to find that. I think what we find is it's not going to change the athlete's perspective. As an athlete, I'm training, I'm napping, I'm eating, I'm competing. That's my bubble, that's my world. It doesn't diminish the Olympics, competing for my country on the Olympic stage in any way, shape, or form, depending on what venue I'm at. So I don't think that's going to change it. As far as the fans, you know, technology these days, we're so driven by that. If you want to see an event, pick up a device and you can see whatever event you want. And I think almost for some of the fans that want to attend the actual Olympics, I think it might even broaden the possibility of getting to see some of the events. If it's in kind of multi-cities, you can actually maybe kind of get there. It might be a little closer to where you're at, or it might be a little bit easier to find a hotel, you know, kind of logistical issues like that. So I think it will be a change, but I'm not sure it's going to be something that will make the Olympics unrecognizable. I think they do such a great job of really making it a great fan experience.
And maybe one of the legacies is to enhance regional cooperation, which the more cities outside the core, the better. We'll have to see. But Shannon, another big change with implications for athletes, going from a sport-based program to an event-based program. No longer the cap of 28 sports at each Olympics, but established sports like gymnastics would have to cut some events. Are you comfortable with the idea of these trade-offs?
It's a difficult issue. There are always going to be trade-offs. I mean, already in gymnastics, we've seen significant changes. Take my team, for example, in 1996, we had 7 athletes on our team. 2012, there were only 5 athletes on the team. So we've already seen that go down. Other significant changes, I mean, we've gone from having it be a major all-around competition. Now there are a lot fewer all-arounders. Now we're looking at event specialists. So the sport has changed, no doubt about it. And if you're in a sport where events are getting cut, you're not going to be happy. But if you're in a sport that now gets the opportunity to be a part of the Olympic Games and showcase your sport to the world, then that's a really good thing. So there are going to be those trade-offs. I am glad I'm not the one that's going to have to make those decisions.
Well, adapt, change, and evolve, and that's the whole situation. Vicki, your thoughts on going to the event-based system, especially from the angle of resources, sponsorship, TV ratings. Will this move grow the Olympic pie or just slice it into smaller pieces?
This is definitely growth. This is definitely progress. You don't have to look any farther than what's happened with the Winter Olympics in terms of adding new events and the excitement that generates among the audience, the sponsorship. Slopestyle last year, I don't know if you got time to watch it, but man, I did, and it was awesome. I really loved watching it. And those are the kinds of things that I think they're looking to add. You're going to see skateboarding in the Summer Olympics, I'm fairly certain, as soon as they can get it in. I like that the IOC is actually building in some flexibility. This is not an organization known to be nimble. And so the fact that they're adding this in, building it within their structure where they can say, okay, let's look at what actually works for the audience, what they want on TV, what's going to drive ratings, what's going to attract broadcasters. That's only going to grow what they do. As Shannon mentioned, it's going to be really messy getting there because all of the sports that are in the Olympics now, of course, want to stay and they want to keep their events. And it's going to have implications all the way down to grassroots programs, individual athletes wondering, what should I be training for? Should I be in this specialty? Will this event be on the Olympic program by the time I'm ready to be an Olympic athlete? It's going to change that whole dynamic, but in terms of the business of the Olympics, this is only going to make it get much bigger.
Shannon Miller, Vicki McKellis, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us on Beyond the Medals.
Thank you.
Coming up next, Alan Ashley's job success is measured in the U.S. medal count. But for Team USA's Chief of Sports Performance, the responsibilities don't end when our athletes step to the podium.
How do you keep them there? How do you make sure that they are successful year in, year out?
Stay with us as Beyond the Medals continues.
This February, skiing will hit full throttle as the 2015 Alpine World Championships come to Beaver Creek, Colorado. All of the action will be center stage on NBC and Universal Sports Network. Get live racing, post-race analysis, and an exclusive look into the championships every race day on Universal Sports. And we'll be digging into the business of skiing on February's episode of Beyond the Medals with a world-class lineup of special guests and experts. Visit universalsports.com for complete scheduling and program information.
USOC Chief of Sports Performance Alan Ashley has a background in skiing, having spent 16 years managing coaching and training for the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Association. His experience in one of the most complex and diverse Olympic sports serves him well in his current role. All he has to do is oversee the USOC divisions that provide targeted resources and support to national governing bodies, athletes, and coaches. In essence, to create the plan for who gets how much in the quest for sustained competitive excellence. I asked Alan Ashley how he approaches this considerable task.
It's really a matter of drilling down on every sport, every discipline, looking at every single athlete and figuring out how to give them the resources they need along with their NGB to succeed in Rio and really put them in a place where they can compete internationally.
What kind of resources do you have at your disposal? And the tougher question, I guess, is how do you decide who gets what?
Well, the resources are everything from, cash to help pay for training camps, coaches, equipment, to things like sports science and medicine, technology, anything that basically we can utilize to help the athlete either assess themselves, to get better, and figure out how to, jump higher, go faster. The process of determining who gets what is complicated. I mean, there's 48 different national governing bodies, and when you start drilling down in the disciplines, you get down to literally hundreds of disciplines. But the bottom line is to look where we have athletes that are either on the podium or competing successfully internationally. How do you keep them there? How do you make sure that they are successful year in, year out? And then how do you pull up the ones that are just below that, where you can see the gap is small, and we can help them close the gap either by better training, better equipment, more opportunities to compete.
Well, the mandate is wonderful, but you mentioned it, 48 NGBs, and all have diverse leaderships, supporters, sponsors, goals, aspirations. Your job is probably a cross between Mother Teresa and Henry Kissinger. How do you keep it all working?
Primarily by being as transparent and open as we can about, what the objectives are. I mean, you could get into a lot of political conversations, but this is a performance conversation. This is about, at the end of the day, when the games close out, you don't want to be sitting there going, coulda, woulda, shoulda. We should have done more for these athletes. We should have been more focused. What you want to sit there and say is, we did pretty much everything we could in combination with NGBs to give these athletes a chance to stand on the podium, represent their country, their hometown, their community.
When you're finally in that room identifying the last bit of zero-sum game resource allocation, is the preference to perpetuate the superstar and increase his likelihood he wins gold? Is it to pull up the emerging athlete by the bootstraps? I know it's easy to say both, but do you choose? Is it that simple?
We do choose, and I think I probably lean towards actually looking at that individual that's really close, that with a little extra help and a little extra resource can get to the podium. Because in a lot of cases, the athletes that are podium capable already, they're figuring out ways to go after that gold. And there are instances where we'll help facilitate that. But I'm looking for get as many athletes prepared as possible to stand on the podium. And then out of that group, you'll get your gold medalists.
Putting more U.S. athletes on the podium is the core competitive goal of the USOC. But beyond the quest for medals, there's plenty of detailed work that needs to be done to get ready for the games. When we come back, I'll ask Scott Blackman what's at the top of his to-do list with Rio just 18 months away.
Here's the answer to our Beyond the Medals trivia question. The U.S. city that's presented the most Olympic bids without ever being chosen to host the Games? Detroit. 7 proposals between 1944 and 1972.
Social media has become an essential element of the business of sport, a means for athletes and brands to capture consumer attention and increase engagement. Thanks to our friends at MVP Index, we'll spend some time on each episode of Beyond the Medals looking at social media metrics and Olympic sport. For instance, on average, Olympic athletes who win gold medals extend their reach across social media platforms by 153%. Silver medalists see gains of 83%. Oddly, bronze medalists do a little bit better at 93%. Athletes who reach the Games but don't medal average just a 19% increase in social media reach. Here's how the Games break down across Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're looking forward to sharing more exclusive research from MVP Index in every Beyond the Medals program. By the way, the USOC's Twitter handle is @USOlympic, and Team USA is approaching 600,000 followers. When you add in all the athletes, teams, and corporate partners in the social media ecosystem, that's a lot of exposure for the Olympic brand. But it's also a potential problem. There's more scrutiny than ever when athletes make mistakes and more opportunity for negative messages to snowball. Scott Blackman's aware of the pitfalls, and it's just one of the many issues he's working on as the calendar flips over to 2015.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much more scrutiny today, and whether it's intentional or just an outgrowth of all the technology, it's going to be a reality. It's important to us that our athletes understand the opportunity that they have. So before they go to the Olympic Games, we run a program with them called the Ambassador Program, where we bring in some of our, older retired athletes who had been through it and saw what happened to athletes who maybe didn't take advantage of that opportunity. It's important that they understand both the upside and the downside of the great privilege that they have of being on the Olympic team.
Scott, we're 18 months from Rio. What's on the top of your to-do list?
We've got a lot going on in Rio. The good news is that Rio's going to be ready. I know there was a lot of talk about that a couple of years ago, but in our recent visits, we feel really good about where that organizing committee is. We're focused now on trying to find a good location for USA House. We're trying to find good high-performance locations, training locations for our teams, making sure we have hotels. It's a big operation. We've got 600 athletes headed down for the Olympic Games and almost an equal number of support staff going down to help them with that. So a lot of moving pieces, and hopefully we'll be able to put them all in place.
The presumption's been that you run a peak and valley business where even years, the revenue's there, Olympic years, everybody's excited about it, odd years not. You seem to have evened that out a lot. What's happening in 2015?
Yeah, you can't look at any individual year with us. Our expenses and our revenues are kind of loaded into the even-numbered years, and so we tend to look at things in 4-year cycles. So we have an $800 million budget over the 2013 to 2016 period. We'll probably add, $10 or $20 million to the bank within that period and help build up our endowments for athletes. So, we really tend to look at things in 4-year bites, and it's not helpful to isolate any particular year. Part of the reason our business is a little bit uneven is because NBC wants to make sure we show up at the Olympic Games before they pay us our share for the broadcast rights. So usually the even-numbered years we get a big bump because of the broadcast contract. Sponsorship is really pretty spread out, and philanthropy is becoming much more predictable.
That's going to do it for this edition of Beyond the Medals. Remember, each month we'll examine the business issues at the heart of Olympic sport, introduce you to the power players who set strategy and make decisions, and give you behind-the-scenes access to the programs that support the world's best athletes. Next time, we'll focus on USA skiing as America's top performers compete at Vail Beaver Creek. We'll see you then. I'm Rick Horrow. Thanks for watching Beyond the Medals, the business of sport.